Yay, great. So this is our agenda. We're going to define solidarity economy. We're going to talk about it in action, and then we're going to connect it to JCUA in our lives. So to define it, can I have someone read this definition off of the screen now that you can see the screen? A volunteer. Liz, how about you? Oh, sorry, Jason, you'll get the next one. Go ahead, Liz.
Oh, sorry, I wasn't sure who you were saying to get that. Okay. Defining solidarity economy. The solidarity economy is a movement and framework to build a just and sustainable economy that prioritizes people and planet over endless profit and growth.
Okay, that's a lot of words. Jason, do you want to read it again? Actually.
Sure.
Thanks, Liz.
The solidarity economy is a movement and framework to build a just and sustainable economy that prioritizes people and planet over endless profit and growth.
Okay, so what is coming to mind as you're hearing this definition? What's standing out so far? You can put it in the chat, but if anyone wants to share out loud as well, that works too. What's standing out? And endless stands out. Okay, say more about that, Liz.
Yeah, just that it's not against profit and growth, but there's this sense of something that just has no limit to it. That is not something that we are attaching value to. So I think that word feels important.
Nice. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, and Aria is adding this really importance of the people and the planet being the priorities. Did you want to add on that, Aria?
Not really. Just
okay.
Just that it's interesting that it's like not only people, but it's important to keep in mind that like also the planet as well.
Yeah, so like environmental justice or some version of that seems to be really important for solidarity economy. Izzy, I saw you unmute.
Yeah, I think the thing that this brings me to, and something I don't know enough about, I've just read a little bit, is like ideas of degrowth, or like, should we be pursuing economic growth as the goal, right? And then also critiques of that doesn't mean just endless. I don't know. I think I'm not sure exactly where this is going with it yet. So I'm interested in seeing where it goes, because growth could mean like we always need more stacks of money next to you, or is it spreading growth and meaning like providing incomes and livelihoods to ever more people as our population has been growing or something? I don't know. I don't know what this means yet, so I'm interested.
Right. That's really important. A great distinction. Like growth is in like increased inclusion is also a form of growth. Yeah. Isaac.
I think what comes to mind for me is like, I keep hearing this term like benevolent capitalism. Like it sort of feels similar to what this is saying, but I think benevolent capitalism still like leans towards that like continual growth and profit, and this does not necessarily like put that as a priority.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. All right. We're going to hear more thoughts as we go. And I want to, in this next slide, share just a little bit more about it, about solidarity economy. From what I've read and understand, SE envisions a post-capitalist society rooted in democracy and understands the economy beyond just the concepts of market and state, by defining economy as a means by which communities meet their needs and create livelihoods together. And part of this is solidarity economy, as we'll refer to it. SE seeks community control over land and food, housing, labor, money and finance, energy and utility, and art and technology. So a real democratization of these, what we think of as commodities in a lot of ways. So just a little bit of history. The term solidarity economy is thought to have originated during the Spanish Civil War in 1937 to describe a movement between urban and rural workers and bringing them together. In the coming century, SE became more and more popular in Latin America, especially in Chile, Colombia, and Brazil, and emerged most strongly in the 1990s. And that's really where a lot of the framework was built out. And SE formally arrived in the US at the 2007 Social Forum in Atlanta. That said, SE practices have existed under other names or informally among communities, particularly communities indigenous to the global South, for thousands of years, and in disenfranchised communities in the US as well over the more recent centuries. So that's a little about the history of SE, though there's probably much more to go into. SE is a values-driven framework, and here are some of the primary principles that a lot of practitioners have come together to identify. These are like principal themes, and then there are principles from in each of them, and then they each go with practices. So for the sake of this session, we'll just focus on the bigger picture, but I'm happy to share out the more detailed principles going forward. But we have collective care, relationships, and accountability, shared resources, and I think this one's really getting at shared information, cooperation, and not competition. Liberation culture, which includes anti-racism, feminism, and considerations for disability and environmental justice. Democracy and process, which we touched on as well, like shared ownership, democratic decision-making, and then education and leadership development. So as you were thinking about those principles, I can go back to them, but where in your lives have you seen these principles practiced, and where have you seen these principles fail to be practiced? Feel free to unmute to share and or add thoughts in the chat. And I'll go back to the principles slide. Mutual aid groups, like the closest embodiments of these principles. What about mutual aid groups? It's coming out for you, Jason, or Julie, whoever was the brains behind that.
I'll take credit for that one. For me, I mean, in a lot of senses, I think I see a lot of boxes of these principles checked by mutual aid groups when I think of like collective care, building relationships, sharing resources as a means of distribution of resources. They generally tend to be democratic or at least like grassroots led. And they're like, yeah, the ones that I've seen are kind of leaderful organizations, and I think they aim to help, from help to reallocate resources and help to prevent people from, need. And so I think that has a lot of like liberation culture in it as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's thinking about resources, democratizing them, democratizing the decision making. Mm-hmm. Thanks. Others?
I'll say that in my life, I've belonged to different organizations that were run using a collective model, and where there was consensus decision making, and so there were ways, and at the leadership development, people started out as volunteers and different ways that leadership was developed. So there were elements of this in the organization that I was part of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, nice. Thank you, Maria. And Izzy's adding about labor unions, democratizing outcomes and decision making in communities and organizations. I think that's a great example. Cool. So let's talk more about the strategies and then get into some models. So how is it actually practiced? As a movement, it really focuses, SE that is, focuses on resisting and building. So the strategies that SE operates on like 3 different dimensions as strategies: consciousness, and this is probably going to be familiar to the organizers in this room. Consciousness, this desire for transformation, vision of transformation, theory of transformation, power, which is a big word and one we've dived into before, but like resisting and reforming and governance and control, and then economy, these economic alternatives. And much of what I've read about SE has stressed that it is a movement and that no single project, so no single cooperative or community garden, etc., on its own is solidarity economy. That's a cooperative or a community garden. Solidarity economy needs to be connected to other components of the economy and be part of this movement building in order to really embody what the framework is. So these models, I just want to share to explore them using this models of the economic cycle, these moments in the economic cycle. So this is the building economic alternatives part of that strategy diagram. And so starting with creation, which obviously it's a cycle, so things go about, there's really no beginning or end, but just to start with creation, the guiding question defining creation is, where do the basic raw materials come from? So an example of that could, in following an SE model, would be collective land ownership. So if you're growing the food that's going to the market and that's collectively owned, that would be on its way towards SE. I mean, there would probably be other components that needed to be figured out. Production or reproduction, that's how are the goods and services produced in a way that fosters cooperative solidarity. I think something fitting under here is worker cooperatives, which we'll get into a little bit more later. Transfer and exchange, part of the cycle. This is, how do goods and services move from production to consumption in ways that enact solidarity values? Examples here are like sliding scale practices for payments or community currencies, which is something I was unfamiliar with before, but does anyone in the room know about community currencies or local currencies? So I think it's an idea of creating some sort of local community currency that can only be used in locally owned businesses or within the locality, which so it encourages spending within a local area. So for example, like if we could only use if Venmo was a community currency and we could only use Venmo at like locally owned businesses, and so you'd put money, I mean, maybe Venmo's a bad example because it's its own thing, but you put money in using whatever larger currency we acknowledge, and then what you get out is like credit to use at these local businesses or entities. Isaac, yeah.
Question, because the way you described it immediately made me think of like company towns, which is a bit scary to think of, like you can have Walmart money that you can only spend at Walmart, like, which I get the idea of it in this instance would be so that like Albany Park has its own economy and like sustains itself, and like Chicago or has a larger one, but like something about it just rang to that like company town stuff, and I was like, I don't know, that sounds a little scary at first.
Yeah, that's really real. And then Julie, that seemed to come to your mind too.
Yeah, it made me think of the McDonald's bucks like a million years ago when you would like scratch off your French fries and get currency to spend at McDonald's. But obviously, yeah, that's like a perverted version of this.
No, but I mean, yes, it's any tool can be used for, for good and for harm, but I think that it is like a really legitimate alarm bell that's going off in your minds in this room. So thanks for bringing that up.
It's interesting. It reminded me of maybe this is kind of splitting the difference between barter clubs and community local currencies in a way, but when I was in college, there were students that organized like a time bank or like a time exchange. I think that's what it was called, where people would kind of offer skill shares and exchanges in that way. And in offering that, they would bank time that they could then, use to barter for other people's to skill share and that kind of way. And that's also what it kind of made me think of in terms of like I don't know, a non-financial currency in a way to try and divorce from that system.
Yeah, that's like, yeah. That's I think a perfect example of exchange transfer part of this model. Nice. Sounds cool. Cool. So then moving on to consumption and use. This question is, through what kinds of cooperative institutions are people and communities organized as consumers? So consumer co-ops, housing co-ops fall here. That's like as residents of the units, making decisions about it and sharing in the labor and benefiting from the product itself that you're consuming, which in this case would be the housing. So if you thought of the housing as the product, yeah, those are some examples, and the others on the screen. And then surplus allocation. This is how is surplus generated in the economic cycle. How is surplus that is generated in the economic cycle appropriated and used in ways that foster solidarity values, and how do they re-enter and reinvigorate the cycle? So an example here are credit unions. They're kind of like consumer co-ops but for banks. So they're banks that operate that are owned and led by the people who have money in the bank or who are receiving loans from the bank. And there was one I just read about called Southside Community Federal Credit Union that is local to Chicago, and many others, but that one was what came up today on my search. So then the last piece you see in the middle of this cycle is the governance, the thing that is really foundational to all of these pieces, both on the organizational and business level. So the question of what kind of institutional policies, rules, procedures shape a supportive context in which solidarity-based initiatives can thrive. So again, on the organizational level, like what is the decision-making process, accountability, equitable internal structures. And then there's also on the local, state, and federal government level, and governance can look like participatory budgeting, or what are the legal structures that are in place that are maybe favorable or not unfavorable to SE projects. So we started sharing a little bit about where we've seen solidarity economy principles, and then also some of these parts of the cycle. But I just want to give more time to share examples of the solidarity economy that you've experienced or witnessed based on what we've just discussed. And then, of course, if you have questions too.
I feel like one really prevalent example is buy nothing groups. I mean, I know it's not like quite rising to this level, but I do think some of them do really create a sense of community. And I think it is special that people choose to give an item away for free rather than try to sell it, and that the giving of it for free and the not wanting to throw it away, but also not wanting to profit from it, it just kind of shows that different kinds of things are being prioritized and valued in those groups.
That's a really great example, Liz.
This is Ina. I don't see my picture. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Hey, Ina.
Okay, great. I don't know if this is an example, but at my tiny little synagogue, I, for the past number of years, have led a social justice program during the break. And my speaker this year was CJ Hawking, the executive director of Arise Chicago. And they were one of the first outside of JCUA justice groups I connected with. And they formed a worker center with the day laborers, and they run it and they make sure that everybody gets turns to go, and they try and get people to go to them rather than, pick up the workers that aren't involved in front of, Lowe's or something. So maybe that's an example.
Yeah, I think there sounds like there are definitely SE components or principles involved there. Yeah, that's really cool. You said Arise?
It's called Arise Chicago. It
Cool.
used to be part of Interfaith Worker Justice.
Oh yeah, okay. Cool. Thanks. Oh, thanks, Izzy. So Isaac says, okay, I knew a credit unions were cool, but didn't realize. Yeah, so I'm there are certain like lending institutions that focus on lending to co-ops, which is really cool, and they are cooperatively owned as well. Shared Solidarity Collective also is a big one in the Twin Cities. I think they're based out of, but they lend all over West, at least. Well, we're going to touch on them a little bit later too. Yeah, great. So feel free to keep. Oh, Izzy, do you want to add one?
Oh, I was just gonna say I haven't actually, I don't think my ward does it, like participatory budgeting process that I've heard from other people in different parts of the city, or I've talked to people who live. I remember I've helped a friend who lives in Cambridge, and I helped him fill out their participatory budgeting. I guess it was the email or the form, whatever. I forgot exactly how they did it. But that's kind of cool where it's about how our cities are spending money and getting, I think, highlighting that democracy part, which I think is really exciting about it, the idea of this.
Cool. Yeah, thanks, Izzy.
Yeah, they do that in the 40th ward also with like there's a $1 million that is like able to be democratively, I don't, my mind's blanking, like allocated.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Maria.
Yes, just to piggyback on the participatory budgeting, Evanston is doing that currently. And I think it's a $3 million pot. But then another thing that I thought of, and I'm not sure it really fits into this idea, but that Northwestern University has there's something called Wildcat Bucks or something, where students get discounts at local businesses. So there is some effort to stay local or promote local business.
Yeah, I was thinking of my college town similar system of that when I heard about these community currencies. Yeah, cool. Yeah, that's so there are a lot of examples in our lives. We'll keep bringing them up. I want to show you some from Chicago, some local examples. So, and a lot of this is informed by the Community Ventures program. I work with the Community Ventures program. And Shy Fresh Kitchen, who I'm sure if you're reading the newsletters, the roundups, you've probably heard about them already. But if you haven't, they're a worker-owned cooperative co-owned by Black women who have experienced incarceration, and they are a food vendor for institutions like daycares, nursing homes, community centers, and they're a CVP partner, so they received a 0% interest loan from JCUA. And workers buy into the ownership after they can be on like a owner, like a member track position, I think is what it's called. So after working at the organization for however many months, they are able to start buying into the to Shy Fresh, and then from there they start to have a vote in decision makings and share in the profits of the cooperative. So some of the members and workers at Shy Fresh got together and decided to purchase a building in Bronzeville as the first site in a larger multi-site housing cooperative for Chicagoans experiencing barriers to housing security, like returning citizens or domestic violence survivors. And they are calling it Jumpstart Housing Cooperative, and they share ownership, and there is and you buy into it. You can maybe take a loan from the co-op itself, and then or just pay it all up front, the shares down if you're able, but most are going to be paying that monthly amount, since it's kind of like I don't think there's an income limit, but there is an income expectation. And they after buying in, the units remain affordable over time because the shares can only appreciate a certain amount as limited equity co-op. And so the units remain affordable even as the market in the neighborhood changes. And in this case, in Bronzeville, probably the market will, there will be a lot of there's a lot of gentrification, and then these units remain affordable and prevent the displacements of the residents there. So they received a 0 interest loan from CVP for the acquisition of the building, this first site, and they closed on the building today. Just before this call, I got the email that they closed, so that's awesome. Yeah, so they are these first 3 to 4 units of the first site are going to be units for workers at Shy Fresh. These are worker owners. Oh, I see your question. Yeah. And so they are building, and this gets me to the third point, this third picture, which is the Chicago Solidarity Collective, a joint effort by Urban Growers Collective, Women's Justice Institute, Grow Greater Englewood, and Upside Down Consulting, and then now Shy Fresh and Jumpstart and they are all working collectively, as what I've mentioned earlier, as part of this SE movement, and to bring more people in and to do the outreach and find potential people who might want to start a worker-owned co-op or join a worker-owned co-op and also join a housing co-op, or do a bit of both or of one, and yeah, you get it. And also then build the power of the movement. One other example in Chicago I wanted to share about on the governance side is that the city started a grant program in the last couple of years using federal stimulus funds called the Community Wealth Building Initiative, and it's out of the Mayor's Office of Equity and Racial Justice. And they are using these funds to support local democratic and shared ownership initiatives and their technical assistance providers. So the first wave was about technical assistance, and now they're providing pre-development funds, and they're going to do a big pilot program. Yeah, this is just like what we were talking about earlier on the governance side, supporting this kind of these kind of economies. Yeah. So any questions on those additions? What's the sparking for you before we dive into our other discussions?